So today we're going to dive into a conversation, and it's a fascinating one. It really pulls back the curtain on this deep tension between two totally different ways of thinking about growth. And what's wild is that it all centers on this one event, something that on the surface should have been a huge win, but it wasn't.
Okay, picture this. It starts with what sounds like a massive victory. A man gets miraculously healed. I mean, that's cause for celebration, right? You'd think so. But here's the twist. The pastor who prayed for him, he was actually frustrated. So, that's the big question, isn't it? Why would a miracle, a clear-cut win, leave a leader feeling disappointed? Well, the answer, as it turns out, really gets to the heart of a fundamental clash between two completely different worldviews.
All right, so here's what happened. You've got this pastor, and he meets a watchman who's been dealing with some really bad knee pain. The pastor does what you'd expect a pastor to do. He prays for the guy, anoints him with oil, and get this, it works. The man is totally, completely healed. We're talking a genuine miracle here. But then Sunday comes around, and the watchman is a no-show. And that is where the pastor's frustration comes in. He felt like the guy had just used him for, a quick medical treatment, a one-and-done fix, without any kind of real commitment. See, for this pastor, the ultimate measure of success was simple: getting another person in the pews on Sunday morning. And that feeling of frustration, it perfectly sets the stage for the core analogy we're going to use to understand these two clashing models. It really comes down to this: the difference between running a restaurant and running a food truck. And believe me, these two mindsets couldn't be more different. On one hand, you've got the traditional model. The whole goal there is attracting people to one central building. And how do you measure success? Easy: attendance. But then you have the movement model, which is all about going to where people already are. It's not so much about gathering a crowd, it's more about starting something that can spread all on its own. So the key metric isn't just attendance, it's multiplication. So you see, the pastor was basically running a restaurant. He'd prepared this amazing meal, the miracle, and he was just so frustrated that the customer didn't make the trip to his place on Sunday to become a regular. He was just waiting for people to come to him. But the coach, he was pushing for a food truck model. Think about it. Instead of demanding the healed man travel to the church building, why not take the church to him? Why not start a brand new spiritual community right there in the watchman's own home? It's like, don't just serve him a meal, teach him how to cook for himself in his own kitchen. So you're probably wondering, how do you actually do that? Well, the main tool for this food truck model is something called a Discovery Bible Study, or DBS for short. But here's another twist. When the coach asked the pastor how he was using it, a whole other misunderstanding came to light. The pastor, he's super proud, and he explains his family's DBS. He says, yeah, the kids read a chapter, they all sing a song, and then his wife explains the whole passage to them. And look, that sounds really nice, right? But it's just not a DBS. What he described is basically a mini sermon. It's a perfect example of that restaurant model again, where one person serves up the meal and everyone else just sits there and passively consumes it. See, a real Discovery Bible Study isn't about one person preaching at all. It's actually a super simple three-part process that anybody can reproduce. And it's designed for everyone in the group to participate and discover the truth for themselves. Okay, let's break this down, because every step here is really intentional. First up is connect. The group just shares what they're thankful for and what's stressing them out. This makes the whole spiritual conversation grounded in real life. It makes faith relevant. Next up is discover. Now, instead of a sermon, the group reads a passage, they retell it in their own words, and then they explore what it means together just by asking some simple questions. This is all about active learning, not just passive listening. And third, and this part is absolutely crucial, is multiply. The group asks itself, hey, who can we share this with? And then they actually commit to passing on what they just learned. It builds that outward momentum right from the get-go. And that analogy, it's so powerful because it's just so true. When the pastor's wife was preaching, she was the only one lifting the weights at the gym. The kids, they were just watching. If you want to build spiritual muscle, you've got to do the lifting yourself by wrestling with the text. And that's exactly what the Discover phase empowers everyone to do. This reluctance to let other people lift the weights, it really points to an even deeper issue. And that's the leader's own mindset about what their role is. Are they supposed to be a gatekeeper or are they a guide? At one point in the conversation, the pastor just comes right out and says it. He argues that his people, they aren't educated enough to study the Bible for themselves. Not like those noble Bereans you read about in the scriptures. And then he says it flat out. They believe what I tell them. Now, that is the classic gatekeeper mindset. It's this belief, and look, it's often well-intentioned, that spiritual truth and understanding have to be filtered through the leader. The leader becomes this essential bridge, the one person who dispenses all the knowledge. But that food truck model, it requires a completely different approach. The guide mindset. A guide trusts that the Holy Spirit can teach absolutely anyone. It doesn't matter what their education level is. So the leader's job isn't to have all the answers. It's to ask good questions and empower people to find the answers for themselves. So, what's the end result of these two different mindsets, the gatekeeper versus the guide? Well, you just have to look at the numbers. They tell a really powerful story. So the coach asks the pastor, "Hey, how many groups do you have?" The answer, 3. And they've had those exact same 3 groups for the last 3 years. We're talking zero growth, stagnation. And here's the simple math behind it all. That gatekeeper mindset, it leads to addition. You get 1 plus 1 plus 1. It's slow, and like we just saw, it can grind to a total halt. But the guide mindset, the one that empowers everybody, that leads to multiplication. 1 group trains 2, and then those 2 each train 2 more. All of a sudden, you've got the potential for exponential, even viral growth. Instead, the vision is about empowering every single believer to turn their own home into a kind of spiritual hub, a center for discovery and community. It's about decentralizing the whole thing and weaving it right into the fabric of the neighborhood. And that leaves all of us with a really challenging final thought. Because this isn't just about churches, right? This applies to any organization, any movement. It forces us to look in the mirror and ask, in our work, in our communities, in our own leadership, where are we so focused on building a fancy restaurant, just waiting for people to come to us, when the real massive opportunity is to launch a whole fleet of food trucks and go meet people exactly where they are?